Bonjour. Je m'appelle Leonard Greenberger, and that's as far as my 4 years of high school French is going to take me. I think we'll go ahead and get started. We have a couple of stragglers. It's a relatively intimate group, so I'm going to come a little closer to you. I actually was proud the other day when I was here, I needed a pen, and I remembered the word was stilo. Something came from it. Spent 4 years in French. I'd like to start off by taking a page out of Dr. Ramirez's book from her fantastic presentation this morning and tell you a story. My firm, Potomac Communications Group, operates at the nexus of energy, science, and technology. And we have a personal and professional passion for helping technical people communicate with non-technical audiences. So given where we operate, it's probably no surprise to you that we do a lot of work in the utility sector. And one of our big utility clients is in the Northeast United States. And several years ago, we helped them prepare for a community meeting where they were going to share the results of some soil gas sampling they had done on a contaminated site that they were required by the State Department of Environmental Regulation to clean up. We thought this was going to be an easy meeting because the data was all good. Soil gas sampling found no VOCs, volatilized organic compounds. And so we thought, hey, this is going to be a walk in the park. People are going to be happy to hear this information. So we didn't necessarily prepare them as well as we might or should have for difficult questions from the people in the community who came to this meeting. And sure enough, not long after our client started the Q&A, a gentleman stood up in the second row, and he was a big guy. And he was clearly angry. In fact, as he started to talk, he became redder and started to shake. He was leaning in, almost confronting my client, who is a very small, slight woman, tough, but small. And I was standing in the back of the room watching this dynamic play out, and it was the first time in my career that I didn't have security at a meeting where I wish I had. I was standing next to the project engineer who was also working for the client, another guy like myself, about the same size, and I turned to him and only half-jokingly said, "You hit him high and I'll hit him low," because I thought we might have to intervene, that he might physically go after it. And what he was so angry about had nothing to do with the soil gas testing that we were talking about. His dog had just died of cancer. And he lived in that neighborhood and walked his dog 2 or 3 times a day, every day, back and forth on the perimeter of this contaminated site. And sometimes he would smell something, and he was convinced that that smell was the reason that his dog had died of cancer. Now, again, I said my client is tough, and she stood her ground, and she used a lot of the tools and techniques that we're going to talk about this morning to calm him down and get him to accept the fact that what is happening on the site and the smell he smelled had nothing to do with his dog's death. She did that by engaging him as a person. Again, what Dr. Ramirez said this morning. As soon as he said his dog had died, she said, "I'm very sorry to hear that. I have 2 dogs. I've lost dogs in the past. It's a horrible thing." She talked to him as a human being. She didn't throw a bunch of data at him. Well, these are the contaminants we found in the site. Here's all the studies that show none of those could possibly cause cancer in dogs or humans. She didn't do any of that. She just talked to him as a person, and he did eventually calm down. It turned out that what he was smelling was mercaptan. Does anybody know what mercaptan is? It's the odor that utilities put in gas, natural gas, before they send it into your homes. There was a regulator station on the site, and there was a small leak. So he had actually discovered something that it was important for the company to know. But there was no science to support the idea that mercaptan has any health effects in animals or in human beings. So she was able to calm him down. And we're going to talk about all the tools and techniques that she used that we teach our clients so that we can engage people as humans, and particularly when they are fearful or upset or worried, and will allow us to communicate effectively in those situations. Let me talk through our agenda today. First, we're going to talk about the landscape in which we operate as technical people trying to communicate technical information to lay audiences. And by the way, I thought this was a really cool, catchy title for this presentation when I submitted it, right after the presidential inauguration, and that is the last you're going to hear anything political. We're not going to go political today. And I thought, hey, this is going to get me the gig, I'm going to have a presentation that says, and sure enough, it worked. Although I'm also sponsoring, that might have helped too. But I thought, hey, this is, you really nailed it, Leonard. And then I Googled this phrase to start my research, and there were hundreds or thousands of articles and papers and presentations available already on Google. And so I didn't invent, this was not anything actually clever, although I think I came up with it on my own. It is something that a lot of people are thinking about, talking about in the science and technology and engineering community, as well as other communities too. How do we operate in this landscape? So we'll talk about that. We'll talk about techniques and tactics to communicate effectively in that context and that atmosphere. We'll have a group exercise that we'll do toward the end, and then we'll have some Q&A. Does anybody have any questions about what we're going to do? I took that off out of Dr. Ramirez's presentation. She was just terrific. I mean, I was absolutely riveted by what she said. She actually covered some of what I'm going to talk about, probably better than I'm going to, but it'll be reinforcement for you. And just a couple of things I have to comment on because they stuck with me. I'm very familiar with the movie Fantastic Voyage. I certainly knew Raquel Welch was one of the stars. I couldn't name any of the other men, although the bad guy played Ernst Blofeld in one of the Bond movies, the bald guy with the cap. That I remember. I don't remember his name. And there's an interesting anecdote that I just have to share because I remember reading many years ago. I'm a science fiction fan, a science fan. I've read a lot of Isaac Asimov. I think everybody here is probably old enough to know who Isaac Asimov is. And he was a consultant on that movie. And I don't know how many of you saw it. Just a few. Okay, so she did a good job of describing the plot. They are miniaturized and injected into this person to find out what has caused him to go into a coma. And in the end, Ernst Blofeld, who also plays the villain in this movie, is trying to sabotage what they're doing, and he eventually gets eaten by white blood cells along with the ship that was inserted into the body. Isaac Asimov was an advisor on that movie, and he kept telling the director and the producers, you can't leave him in the body. Just because the ship and that he was eaten by the white blood cells, when they grow back to regular size, they're going to explode this person's body. He couldn't get anybody to accept that, and in fact, it probably would have ruined the movie because of the way the plot went. And he ended up resigning as an advisor. He said, I can't do this because it's not scientifically accurate. You can't leave that ship in there. So I just thought that was an interesting thing that happened, or anecdote about that movie that was triggered by her talk. So let's talk about the context, as I said, the atmosphere in which we operate. And there's good news and bad news there. When I did that Google search, there is an enormous amount of information out there about how to communicate effectively in a post-truth world. And the difficulty really is summarizing it into this presentation, which I'm not going to be able to cover in just 90 minutes with you. The bad news there is that that there's so much information to really absorb and figure out and put into action. The good news is that as I read through this scientific research, and just based on my own experience over the last 25 years at PCG, I came to realize that, as the words of one of my favorite songs, the fundamental things apply. So the things that we have been doing for a long time to help people communicate effectively in the pre-truth world still apply in the post-truth world. So that's some good news for you. But it is why this is important. Dr. Ramirez did a great job of covering most of this. I just want to, I don't think anybody could argue with any of this or what she said. I want to highlight that last bullet, which is that it's good for all of you as individuals to be better communicators, not only for your organizations, but to help your members communicate more effectively. Because it's going to help you advance in your career if you're a better communicator. It's going to help you serve your membership better if you can help them communicate better. I'm one of those people that Dr. Ramirez mentioned who started off as an engineering student in college. And then it wasn't thermodynamics that got me, it was straight up physics. And I decided that I just wasn't going to be able to cut it as an engineer. and I went to talk to my advisor in the school, and he encouraged me to go into communication. Well, first he tried to have me stay in engineering. And he said, if you're going to leave, why don't you go try a communications degree? Because this was mid-'80s, and he said, we are hearing back from the business community that we're turning out brilliant engineers, brilliant scientists, brilliant researchers, but none of them can tell anybody what they're doing. So it's not doing us any good. And the engineering department was at that moment starting to require students to take some liberal arts courses. There was a very easy English literature class that engineers had to take freshman year that my friends sort of laughed at me about because they really sort of skimmed over the classics. But there was an attempt, at least, to get engineers to be better communicators, and that's something that's still going on now, almost 35 years later. It is a forbidding landscape out there, there's no question about it. There is deep polarization in this country on almost every issue, and particularly on scientific, technical-oriented issues. Just think about climate change as an example. The modern polling goes back to the 1930s when Gallup started his firm. But I have seen in some of the research that I did that this is the most polarized the nation has been since the Civil War. So even going back to things like Prohibition and Vietnam, those periods were not as polarized as we are today. So we have to keep that in mind and think about that. That's one of the reasons why, as I'm going to say in a minute, it's important to engage people on a human level rather than a scientific, technical level, particularly when they're not technical people. There is a overall huge decline in trust among people for institutions, generally among average people. And we're going to talk about that in more detail in a minute. And then there's a phenomenon that's sort of been labeled death of the expert. That it used to be if you were a PhD engineer or a scientist, you walked into a situation with a certain amount of trust and credibility just by virtue of having earned that degree, gotten that education. And what we're finding now is that that's beginning to flip on its head. And being a PhD scientist can actually make you less credible and trustworthy in the eyes of a lot of Americans today. How many of you are familiar with the Edelman Trust Survey? So Edelman, as you know, is a very large public relations firm. Every year they do a global trust survey and they release the results and make it available to everybody, as long as you cite them, of course. And it's very helpful for people, particularly in my business, again, to understand the atmosphere and the context in which we operate. I want to share a few of the slides from their 2017 study. This is, broadly speaking, the 4 institutions that they survey about every year and ask people how much do you trust organizations in these categories. And as you can see, NGOs and business are still above the water, we would call it. So they have a positive favorability trustworthy index. And I would think that, although they didn't look specifically at trade associations or professional societies, that you all would fall somewhere in there. So that's a little bit of good news. You have a relatively high amount of trust among the general populace. And this is global, but it's pretty much true in every country. We'll break it down in a minute. But interestingly enough, look at where media is, and government especially. Media fell 5 percentage points now. Only 43% of people around the world have any sense of trust in the media that they read. They're underwater. So what that suggests, as a practical technique, is what? If you're trying to get your message out about some scientific, technical, or engineering issue, don't necessarily go through the media. Because here you are, relatively more credible than the media. And if you put your messages through an organization or institution that is less credible to you, to people, what does that do to your credibility? It drives it down. There's a phenomenon called credibility transference. You can borrow credibility from people who have more than you, and you can lose credibility if you cite somebody who has less than you, which is the point of the presentation where I always say, do not cite me as an expert on this issue if you're ever out there communicating with people, because as a PR person, I'm way over down here. Fortunately, lawyers are over here somewhere, so there's a group that's a little bit lower than us, but don't cite a PR flag as a source of credibility because it's only going to drive yours down. So this is now looking at media more blown up across the different countries where Edelman surveys. And you can see that in most of the countries where they surveyed, media, trust in media is all-time lows and underwater. Here's the US, right here. You can see, interestingly enough, there was no change. That's probably a good sign that potentially trust in media or distrust in the nation's media may be bottoming out, although we'll see what happens when they do their survey next year. But it's still underwater. Only 47% of Americans trust information that comes to them through the media. And by the way, this is media broadly defined, so it's everything from newspapers and television, traditional stuff, to digital media as well. They break all of this down. Digital media channels tend to be more trustworthy for people than traditional media, and that's sort of happened over the last several years as digital has become more credible and traditional has gone down. It'll be very interesting from a personal standpoint or professional standpoint to see what the battle between the Washington Post and the New York Times over coverage of the Trump administration is going to do to that number. I think we're in a new golden age of journalism among mainstream publications. We'll see if that's reflected in future surveys in terms of people's trust. Since we are...
Before you go on, I have a question.
Sure.
The three blue ones, the three that have that really high jump in trust, what are they?
I'm going to get...
Oh,
thank
okay.
you very much. Perfect segue. Yeah, you have 3 countries that are, well, actually 5 countries that are above water, 3 that are particularly high in terms of their trust, and they're fascinating. This is China. So 65% of Chinese trust the media that they read and digest. Right, which is state-sponsored, and yeah, they probably don't know any better.
Journalists disappear in China a lot.
Yeah. Pardon?
Journalists have been disappearing in China a lot.
So you better trust them. What's going to happen to you? This is India next to them, and then Indonesia. Also Indonesia, a relatively a democracy, but not quite China, but not.
Is social
totally free
media
also.
folded into this?
Yeah, this is across the board.
Okay.
Yeah, but I don't have the survey data. I would encourage you, just Google Edelman Trust Survey and you'll find this. And they do break it down by various channels. And as I said, the main takeaway I think from that is digital tends to be more trustworthy for people than traditional. And then since we cover, here's Canada right here. Since we're here in Canada today, not much better than the United States, actually a little bit worse in terms of people trust information received from the media. And here's a graph that depicts that death of the expert phenomenon that I discussed a few minutes ago. People have always found people like themselves to be the most trustworthy source of information. So, friends, neighbors, family, if they tell you something, you're much more likely to trust and accept it than if it's coming from an unfamiliar source, the media, a trade association, the government. But interestingly, while that still is one of the highest, this is a person like yourself. It's down a little bit from 2016. This is technical expert, which is down 7% from 2016. This is an academic expert, which is down 5%. It's down across the board. You can see the trust is just in every institution is falling off the board. Again, this is global, but it's relatively the same here in the United States. And so what we're seeing is this phenomenon where, again, the technical expertise is beginning to almost count against you as a source of information, whereas other people, peers, are the ones that people trust the most. Again, this is why we encourage you, and why Dr. Ramirez was talking this morning about engaging people on a human level, not on a scientific or technical or data-driven level, because they will react to that much better than they will if you are an academic or a technical expert trying to talk down to them, to be condescending, throwing a bunch of facts at them that they're not going to be able to process or understand. You have to talk to them in their language, and we're going to get into that more as we move forward here today. And what I would suspect is when the 2017 survey comes out next year, that person like yourself will be overall the highest. That's why word of mouth advertising is so powerful. That's the best way. If I used a contractor on my house who did a great job and I tell my neighbor, that's the best kind of advertising there is. Better than anything else you can do. Traditional media, social media, any other channel. So you might say, that's great, Leonard, thanks. That's terrifying. How are we going to figure out how to communicate effectively given all that you just told me? So let's talk about what we can do. And the good news is that there is quite a bit that we can do to be effective communicators in this atmosphere. 3 things to think about. Anytime you're going to be communicating, whether it's to one person, to a member, to a regulator, to a member of Congress, or a group of people, like I'm communicating one to many in this situation. There are three things you need to think about as you prepare what you're going to present in terms of information. One is, who are you talking to? Who is your audience? What education level do they have? What biases do they bring to the conversation? What's their political outlook or affiliation? How much experience do they have? All of those things are things you need to think about when you put the information together. And remember, if you're communicating through the media, that the reporter you're talking to is not your audience. It's the people that reporter serves, whether it's a technical publication, or the Washington Post, or a social media channel. You have to think about who's viewing or absorbing the information that you are sharing through that channel. You want to think, and there's a typo here, I apologize, I realized it this morning after I'd already uploaded, what you want the people you're communicating to take away from your conversation. That's your messages. So think about your audience, number one, who am I talking to? What do I want them to know? And an easy way to sort of whittle that down to something that people can remember and will take away and absorb is to think, Dr. Ramirez said no more than 2 messages this morning in answer to one of the questions that were asked. We encourage no more than 3. What are your 3 takeaway messages? What do you want the person or people you're communicating with to remember 2 hours later? The way we like to tell it is, you can't, I'll illustrate it here today. You come, you're going to spend 90 minutes with me this morning. You're going to go about the rest of your day. Maybe this evening you'll call your spouse. Now, what did you learn today? Well, there was this guy from a firm in Washington, D.C., and he told me these 3 things. If you do that, if you get those 3 things, one of which is always to consider these 3 things, then I will have done my job. It doesn't matter all the background I just gave you, if you remember the Edelman Trust Survey results, it doesn't matter if you remember what I was wearing, and none of that is important, but if you remember those 3 key points, then I've been an effective communicator. So think about that when you're interacting with people. And then, third is channels. How do I best deliver the information that I'm trying to get across to that audience? Sometimes it's directly, email, phone calls. Sometimes it's through mass media or social media. There are a lot of different ways, particularly in the media space, to get information out. I'm sure you all have newsletters that you send to your members. You have journals, many of you, that you publish. All of those are channels. So what's the best way for me to communicate this information to that audience? If you can answer those 3 questions beforehand and do it well, then you're going to be an effective communicator. And again, this is one of the second thing, engage people, not issues. So all of you represent organizations that are very deep in the weeds. We work with many scientific and technical associations and societies. You may not be scientific, technical people yourselves. You may not have PhDs or master's degrees in the subjects that you're representing, which actually could work to your benefit because then you can figure out how to communicate and translate what the experts are saying into something that real people can understand. But you have to make sure that you engage people. And I think one of the reasons that climate change, the debate over climate change has become so polarized, I do blame the scientific community for much of that, because the way they reacted to people's concerns and beliefs that perhaps climate change wasn't happening, or if it was happening, it wasn't being caused by humans, and they sort of put those people off, and it became a battle. So instead of engaging those people in a way that might have made them, that soft middle, not the hardcore deniers you're never going to get, or the hardcore believers you don't worry about, but that soft middle is more likely to look science's way. And I think there's some attempt being made by the scientific community to make that change in the climate change space. We did some work for the American Geophysical Union several years ago, and a few other associations that were also part of this small coalition. And our job was to come up with messaging that would break through and convince people that climate change was something that needed to be discussed, an important issue that had to be addressed. And that was one of the findings from the research we did with people was, whenever I try to raise concerns about whether it's really true or not with somebody who really seems to know, they dismiss me out of hand. You don't know what you're talking about. Here's all the data. That didn't work. It just made them dig in harder. Because, let's skip to this next slide. Anybody want to guess what this stands for?
Emotion is greater than facts.
Exactly. So any polarized issue, difficult situation, people are thinking with the emotional parts of their brains, not the rational parts of their brain. And so when you try to throw a bunch of facts and data at those people, they bounce off because they just will not penetrate when somebody is upset or fearful or suspicious or distrustful. And so a lot of the techniques and tools we're going to talk about today are designed to calm that emotional response down so that you can engage with people and get them to listen then to the information that you have to convey, and that's why it's so important to engage on the human level. You have to respect other viewpoints, bring empathy to a conversation, not just facts. I mentioned my client in the community meeting, whose first reaction to the gentleman who was upset about his dog was to talk about her own dogs and how much she loved them and how hard it was whenever she had to pull them down. That's being empathetic. I understand where you're coming from. I'm not just a scientist in my ivory tower. I'm a person, I'm a human being. As Dr. Ramirez says, we share the same goals and objectives and feelings. And then if you can convince people that you're human, they're going to be more likely to listen to you as an expert. Active listening. Anybody ever take an active listening course? So it's not thinking about how you're going to respond when somebody's talking. It's actually absorbing what they're saying and then repeating it back to them. So what I hear you saying is this: is that right? Tell me more. And getting them to provide you with more information and making sure that you convince them that you actually care about their concerns and their fears. And then tell stories that people can relate to. I have one. May come as a surprise to you. Several months ago, I had the opportunity to testify before the DC Council's Committee on Health. I'm active in a nonprofit organization that is trying to provide greater access to public restrooms in the core of Washington, D.C. I don't know how many of you are from D.C. or have visited, but although it's gotten better with some new memorials that have gone in, World War II and Martin Luther King, where there are some public restrooms, it is still can be a very long walk to find a public restroom, and particularly at night when only 3 are open 24/7. In case anybody visits, the Lincoln Memorial bathrooms are open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. The bathrooms at Union Station, train station near Capitol Hill, are open 24/7. And the bathrooms at Jefferson Memorial are open 24/7. This is where you learn to become a member of this organization. I don't know how well you know the geography of DC, maybe I should have put that up, but it's a long walk from any one of those places to the other. And of course, homeless are important to us, particularly because they don't have anywhere to go. And so I had an opportunity to testify. There were several of us who were testifying. It was an open hearing. You could testify about anything relevant to the Committee on Health's jurisdiction. So many of my colleagues talked about just that, how many bathrooms there were, how they compared to other cities, a lot of facts and data, which was great. Getting it on the record is important. But I decided I'm not going to do any of that because it's just going to repeat what other people said. I'm going to take my own lesson and I'm going to tell a story. So when I had sat at the table, which was sort of intimidating actually, it was Vincent Gray, who was actually a brilliant politician, but an intimidating presence. I just decided I had 2 minutes, and here's the story that I told. I'm a runner. I ran my first marathon, Marine Corps marathon in DC in 2005. And as I was coming across the Lincoln Memorial Bridge, in miles 6 or 7, and onto Ohio Drive, which runs along the river, suddenly I had an urgent need to go. And it was very urgent. I was surrounded by other runners. The nearest comfort station was at least a mile away. There were no bushes even around or trees. And I started to panic. What am I going to do? And I looked up, and in the distance, I saw Franklin Delano Roosevelt Memorial, which I had visited several times because my kids were younger then. And I knew they had public restrooms during the day. So I sped up my pace. I veered off the course, went to the FDR Memorial, did what I had to do, got back in the race and finished. While I was in the hearing room watching other people talking and testifying, there were 3 members of the city council that were in attendance. Almost every person, after a minute or 2, or even 30 seconds, they were on their phones, or they were turning to the person, their staffer, and talking to them. They were not looking at the person who was testifying. They were not paying attention to what the person who was testifying was saying. When I said, I'm going to tell you my poop story, everybody looked at me. Councilman Grosso laughed. out loud. And I don't know what effect it had, but I can guarantee you, of all the probably 80 or 90 people who testified that day on a wide variety of topics, they remembered the poop story from that crazy guy. So that's how effective stories can be. Here's something to wake you up and get you thinking. Dr. Ramirez talked about the story arc that Hollywood has done so well, makes so much money. The same sort of story where the protagonist takes some sort of a journey, reaches a climax where it's resolved, and then there's a denouement. Anybody want to know why storytelling is so powerful, or the reason why storytelling is so powerful? Sex. I'm just going to leave it there, let you think about how that arc goes, and that is why stories are so powerful to human beings. A lot of people believe it's because of the subconscious relationship with sex. One other thing that this is relatively new, and it came out of the research that I did. I'm not a historian, but I'm a history buff. And like a lot of people, one of my favorite historical figures, the one I admire more than most, is Abraham Lincoln. And it occurred to me, I mean, he's generally held up as one of the country's, if not the world's, great communicators of all time. And it occurred to me, in trying to communicate scientific information, technical information, we really should think like Lincoln and do the things that he did way back in the 1860s to be such an effective president and communicator. He knew his audience. He knew who he needed to be speaking to, whether it was Northerners, abolitionists, Southerners, foreign powers. One of the things that Lincoln was very effective at doing was I don't know if many of you read about the Civil War, was keeping England out of the war. There was great concern that the British might side with the South, and that was going to be very detrimental to the North's cause. And he always kept that in the back of his mind when he was speaking. I've got to make sure that the British don't interfere here and make my job harder. There's a famous book by Doris Kearns Goodwin called Team of Rivals. Abraham Lincoln, when he ran for the Republican nomination in 1860, it was only the second time the Republicans had nominated a president, he had 3 challengers, whom he bested and then went on to win the presidential election in November. These are his 3 challengers. Can anybody name any of them? Okay, here's your history lesson for today. This is Salmon Chase. Lincoln made him Secretary of the Treasury. This is William Seward. Seward's Folly, the man who bought Alaska from the Russians. He made him Secretary of State. And this is Edward Bates. He became Attorney General. So the first thing he did, much like Barack Obama did with Hillary Clinton, was he brought his rivals into the tent as a way of not only enhancing his own credibility with the public, but making his job easier in selling what he wanted to sell to the American people. And again, that goes back to not dismissing people who think differently than we do. Or maybe you're skeptical, again, about climate change, or vaccinations, or any other scientific issue. That we in our hearts and minds and souls know the truth of them. But they come with a different bias, and we have to respect that. If we don't respect it, then we're not going to be effective communicators. One of Lincoln's greatest traits, I believe, was his unsurpassed ability to forgive and forget. He was ready to bring the South back into the Union right away. Let bygones be bygones. Same with the team of rivals he put together. He wasn't going to let the past affect how he was moving forward. He was going to embrace it, in fact. And I think that's something that we have to do too. I mentioned that how people are beginning to change their views about climate change, the scientific community is changing its views about communicating when it comes to climate change. That has something to do with it. It's just we've fought a lot in the past about this. Let's put that behind us and let's find a way to move forward together in a way that's beneficial and acceptable to all of us. And he was passionate and tenacious. I talked about the context in which we operate, the difficulty in terms of trust that we bring as technical experts, but he never gave up, and neither should we. That's something that we just have to do. That's engage the public on these important scientific, technical, and engineering issues. Does anybody have any questions before we move on? Okay, so there's a field of study called risk communication. that I'm going to focus on now for the next part of this presentation. It's based on 45 years of research in the lab and in the field, so it's a real science. And it's used in what are called high concern, low trust situations, which I'm going to talk in more detail about in a minute. But the principles and the skills and techniques from risk communication apply in any communication situation. It doesn't necessarily have to be high concern, low trust, where people are worried about something and distrustful of you as a source of information, which I'm sure all of you find frequently in your jobs. But they apply here, today, among us. And so I encourage you to apply these techniques whenever you're communicating as a way to break through and win people over to your side of the question. And the whole point of this communication is to establish and maintain trust and credibility with your audience. That's another one of those points I want you to remember when you talk to your spouse about their presentation later. It's all about trust and credibility. In some situations, we walk in with trust and credibility. Hopefully, in this situation, I walked into the room with some trust and credibility in your eyes. ACCESSE saw fit to accept my proposal, so I benefit from their credibility transfer. So you have some trust in me that because they essentially endorsed this presentation. Although I might have eroded some of that by telling you that I was also a sponsor of this event. I've been in the business for 25 years. In fact, today is the 25th anniversary of when I joined my firm. So that provides you with some trust and credibility. So hopefully I have it. Doesn't mean I can't lose it. Doesn't mean I have to work hard to maintain it with all of you. But at least I've come into this situation. It's low concern, high trust. High concern, low trust is the opposite. It's like the community meeting I mentioned earlier, where we thought it was going to be relatively easy, but it very quickly degenerated into high concern, low trust. And fortunately, our client was able to apply some of these principles to get out of that situation. So I say high concern, low trust. What does that mean? High concern means that people are worried and fearful. It may be because of something you're doing to them as an organization or an individual, but it may just be a general fear that people have. Again, climate change is a classic example. Vaccinations are another one that's been a difficult issue for scientists to communicate about because people are just afraid and concerned. It can be any number of things. They may fear for their well-being, for the well-being of people they care about. That applies certainly in this community meeting and many others that I've done. People in the neighborhood worried about what's going on in that industrial site might be harming my health, my dogs, my pets' health, my kids' health. It can be a financial burden that you impose on people. Climate change could be seen that way in terms of money that will have to be spent and where people's taxes are going to go. That could cause people to be concerned. And it can just be generally emotional response. People are worried, they're upset, they're afraid. Any of those burdens that you place on people that you're communicating with, or have been placed on people that you're communicating with, causes a high concern environment. And low trust, we've talked about that already today. There's a general decline in trust that people have in institutions here in the United States and around the country and around the world. And also people may feel that you've harmed them before in some way. That can cause them to distrust you. They may think you have a vested interest as representatives of your professions. You are only going to say good things about the people who pay your salary, and so why should I trust what you're saying? You're paid to tell me good things. And this general erosion of authority that has taken place in this country, going all the way back really to the Vietnam War and the civil unrest in the late 1960s and early 70s. When you look at the Edelman Trust Survey, even though they were doing it back then, if you sort of project backwards, you can see the trust in people in positions of authority begin to crest and head down as a result of the Vietnam War and Watergate especially. There was a conscious, very detectable break at that point. And unfortunately, while it has sort of gone on a roller coaster ride, the general direction has been down. And so I was going to say we're going to get political once, I'll do it a second time. There's no reason to think that it isn't going to get worse as a result of what's happened in the last 6 months, regardless of what your political affiliation may be. So here you are, you're in a high concern, low trust situation. What do you do about it? Well, there's a few equations. We talked about emotions trumping facts, and we deal with that first. Express some caring and empathy to the person you're talking to or the people that you're talking to, so they see you as a human being and you're relating to them on a human level rather than a scientific sort of data-driven level. P equals R. Anybody want to guess
Perception equals reality.
Outstanding. I'm having some effect. Just perception equals reality. And we operate on which side of this equation?
Hopefully reality.
Hopefully, but no. We operate on, particularly in a high concern, low trust situation, but I would argue in almost any situation that's controversial and that you may deal with, we're operating on the perception side. Again, that's thinking about your audience. What are their perceptions? How are they coming at this issue? Why do they think the things that they do? What other sources of information do they pay attention to? That's going to help you figure out what the perception is, which will make it much easier for you to then shift over to the other side and deal with reality. S equals B plus is just shorthand for success, comes from being positive. In a lot of situations like this, particularly if you've worked for an organization on an issue for a long time, you feel beaten down. Every time you try to communicate, people blast you. If you look at any online news source, the comment section, the first comment is, hey, this is great, I totally agree, and then there's 57, I'm going to hunt you down and kill you. That can be difficult, right? I mean, it's enervating. It saps your energy, it makes you feel like it's not worth it. But as I said about Lincoln, you have to be tenacious. You just have to keep at it, and you have to go into those situations with a positive attitude. You have a good story to tell, and you're going to tell it in the face of adversity, no matter what might be going on. You're going to keep at it. And you're going to literally physically stand tall, chin up, shoulder back. This is my story, I'm going to share it with you because I think it's important for others. And we talked about third parties equal higher credibility. When you can cite somebody who has greater credibility than yourself, you get a little bump in your own credibility, but it works the opposite way too. Talk a little bit about risks. This is risk communication. There are many different factors that affect people's perceptions of risk. There are dozens, probably hundreds. I've put 8 of the most powerful influencers on people's perception of risk, and to talk about how that perception creates their own reality and why it might do so and how we have to deal with it. Benefits, do people see a benefit from the risk that is being imposed on them? If they do, they're more willing to accept it. In fact, they're 1,000 times more willing to accept it. Sharing. Is the risk shared by everybody equally, or is it being imposed on a small group of people, like those who lived outside this contaminated site, or nearby this contaminated site that I talked about earlier? Do they feel they have control, or is it out of their control? Are they accepting this risk by choice, or is it being forced on them? And you can sort of understand all the rest. The reach, small community, large, the source, where is it coming from? There's one other factor that I think has become very important, and here I'm going dipping into politics again, I should have said I was only going to say it once, and that's political affiliation. So a lot of the most recent research in this communication field is looking at how people's political affiliation affects their perception of a risk. And it becomes no surprise to you that people who are more conservative are probably less likely to accept a risk like climate change than people who are more liberal. There's also a lot of research, some very interesting stuff that I saw and been reading lately about family organization and dynamic in terms of determining whether or not you're going to be a conservative or a liberal or a moderate. And what this research is starting to show is that the more patriarchal your family structure was, the more your father was in charge of family life and sort of set the rules and enforce them, the more likely you are to be conservative. If your family dynamic was more inclusive, where everybody was involved in decision making, then you tend to be more liberal. And if it's a combination of the two, which is exactly my background, my father was a disciplinarian, but he was not what am I trying to say? He was not, he didn't force things on us, is what I'm trying to say. There's a word, I can't think of it in French. Overbearing, thank you, Stacey. Overbearing. So I'm moderate in persuasion. When I looked at that research, I thought, wow, well, at least in my case, they really got that right. So that is becoming one of these factors that people are beginning to pay attention to when it comes to thinking about how people perceive risk. So let's talk about how this might affect real-world perceptions of risk. How many of you consider yourself to be safe drivers? Be honest. Okay. Oh, good. Peter actually is in.
I hate driving.
Okay. Well, then you're in the 5%.
Okay.
Allstate does a survey every year, in which they ask a number of questions. One of them is, do you consider yourself to be an above-average driver? 95% of Americans consider themselves to be an above-average driver, which of course is impossible, but that's the perception we have. So we don't think of driving as being particularly dangerous. Peter doesn't like driving, so you see it a different way. But most of us get behind the wheel without a second thought. Go about our day. The benefits associated with driving are very clear. We couldn't work, live, get our kids to school, go on vacation, do anything without our cars. So we see the benefits, and that affects our perception of risk of driving. Let me ask this question. How dangerous is driving? According to the National Highway Transportation Safety Administration, I'm borrowing credibility, there are how many out of 100 people, or one in how many people will be involved in a fatal car accident over the course of their lifetime? One out of how many of us in the United States?
Fatal car crash?
Fatal car crash.
People are going to die in a car crash?
No, 2 out of 100.
2 out, okay. 2 out of 100, so that's 1 in 50, that's what you're saying. Okay, that's pretty cool.
I'm a terrible.
Oh, another. The real risk of being involved in a fatal car accident, which means not necessarily that you are killed, but somebody in the accident is killed, is 1 in 72. 1 out of every 72 of us will be involved in a fatal car accident, of course, across the course of our lifetimes. If driving were a chemical, the Environmental Protection Agency or the Food and Drug Administration would regulate it out of existence tomorrow. That's how dangerous it is. Think about what they're paying attention to. I believe opioid overdoses have overtaken fatal car accidents as a cause of death in the United States. People are paying a lot of attention to that, putting a lot of money into treatment and helping people get off opioids. But we do have some people who are thinking about making driving safer, but nobody's thinking about regulating it out of existence. Maybe Google or one of the companies will come up with a self-driving car that will make it a lot safer, but for now we're all out there bouncing around, doing the best we can. But it's a very dangerous, it's the most dangerous activity that we voluntarily choose to engage in, other than smoking. But when you look at all of these influencers, you begin to see why driving might not be perceived to be that big a risk. It's shared, we're all out there. We're all driving. We feel we have control. We don't. By definition, an accident is something we can't control. My son was just in a pretty bad car accident, fatal, a couple of months ago. His car was totaled. But we think we have control. We don't. We do choose to drive. Some of us may not have to. You live in the city. Again, my son is a high school student. He didn't have a car, but he got around fine. He took the metro, he took the bus, he took later on, he took Uber. And he was able to get around with a car. But most of us choose to do it. It's something familiar. We do it every day. Everybody does it, so forth. I don't think political affiliation probably has anything to do with driving. But you can see why a real risk of 1 in 72 in people's perception becomes, it's an infinitesimal risk. It's not going to happen. I'm not going to get hurt when I'm fine. So, is driving dangerous? You bet it is. Do people think it is? Most people don't. Are vaccinations safe? We all know vaccinations are safe. My wife and I are expecting a baby girl in October. We have been interviewing pediatricians, and one of the things we've heard universally from everyone we've talked to is, you must follow our vaccination protocol or you cannot be a patient, because they don't want to put their other patients at risk. It's also a way of trying to force people to do the right thing. But why would anybody think that vaccinations are unsafe? We know the reality is that they're safe. Yes, there's a 1 in some huge number chance that a child is going to develop a disease as a result of the injection, but the overwhelming odds are in favor of vaccinating your children. Well, think about these perception influencers again. And you begin to understand why some people have become fearful of vaccinations to the point where they're refusing to have their children vaccinated and are creating, maybe it's waning now, but we're creating a public health crisis in the United States. And some of these factors are why people perceive that risk to be much bigger than it really is. Some of the ones that are particularly influenced particular influence in this case, familiarity. People don't really know what's in, they don't understand what's going on. It's not familiar to them, so they tend to reject it. There's a high source of dread. People are particularly concerned about anything that might affect their kids. And vaccinations, that's right up there at the top. And again, the odds are huge, but the one in however many that it happens to is pretty awful. And so when you look at these things, choice is a big issue with people who are against vaccinations. I want my child, I want to be able to make the choice about whether or not they're vaccinated. And so the fact that people are forcing them to do it, pediatricians won't take them as patients if they don't, that's working to generate more fear in them about vaccinations. So when we think about these factors, are vaccinations safe? We know they are, but now we can understand better why some people might think they're not. This is a scattergram out of my book. I wrote a book about risk communication. It's called What to Say When Things Get Tough. On the x-axis here, you see things in terms of whether or not they're a threat to people. So here are car accidents, again, one of the most dangerous activities we engage in. Over here on the lower end of threat is fireworks, although parents are always telling their kids don't go out and use fireworks, I don't want to put out your eye. The truth is that there are very few injuries or fatalities among people who choose to use fireworks around the 4th of July. And then the y-axis is fear. So this is based on studies that are done every year in the United States, with the lowest things that people fear the least, with things that people fear the most. If we were rational, risk perception, if we perceive risk in a rational way, every one of these items would be on this line from the lower left corner to the lower right. We would be as afraid of them as we should be in the real world. You can see there are some things that way. Fireworks, lightning, not really dangerous, tend not to be afraid. Cancer and stroke are pretty dangerous, and we fear it in an appropriate way. In fact, many of us take proactive steps to avoid those. Street crime is right here in the middle, but you can see everything that's off that axis is out of whack. There's a false perception of the risk associated with those activities. And it's in part because technology has changed the world, and we have become, as a result, as human beings, very poor at assessing risk. We used to be very good at it. Dr. Ramirez mentioned saber-toothed tigers. 10,000 years ago, when we were hunter-gatherers, we were great perceivers. Don't go near that lion. Stay away from the tribe downriver. Don't eat those berries, they're poisonous. We knew and were afraid of exactly what we should be afraid of. In today's modern world, it's confused us. We don't know how to assess the risk, in part because it's so technological and scientific. Most of us don't have those kinds of backgrounds. And that gets back to the whole point of this, which is trying to be effective communicators in a post-truth world, is understanding why people perceive these things. And so you can see the various things on the chart here. One that I always like to point out is shark attack. For the last 42 years, 41 years, shark attack has been in the top 10 things that Americans fear the most. Why do you think that might have happened 42 years ago? Exactly right. Before Jaws came out, it was the first real summer blockbuster movie. I don't know if you remember that. Pre-Star Wars, pre-Indiana Jones, pre-all of that. People suddenly became terrified of going in the water because of shark attack. Is a shark attack likely to happen to you? Is it a real risk? It almost never happens. It does happen, very rarely. And of course, you have to be in the water, first of all, to be attacked by a shark. But
So I have a question.
Yeah.
And how much does the media play into warping this, right? So shark attacks. If there's a shark attack, it's all over every newspaper because it's thrilling, it's exciting, it's got some of that track. So does that bend us to raise that to a higher level?
Absolutely.
Where some of these other ones sort of get ignored by the media.
that's right. And it's the second time
Right?
you segued right into the next point. I appreciate it. That's exactly right. One of those things that is on the list of influencers is media attention. So if the media is focused on something as a risk particularly, like they are shark attacks, but only have been since Jaws came out in the 1970s, yes, that will cause people's fear to rise, my microphone to fall off, and all kinds of other terrible things. So that does have an effect when people, when there's a spotlight on an issue, it causes people's fear to go up into cases. So there is a research that's been done in the field of risk communication by one of the real gurus who I learned a lot of the information that I'm sharing with you from. His name is Covello. He's a PhD in toxicology and in communications at Columbia University. And he did a lot of the original research in the early and mid-1970s in this field, and was one of the gurus of the science of risk communication. And based on his research, he came up with what he calls his credibility pie. Based on research that he did in the field and in the lab, he figured out that people tend to judge whether somebody else is a trustworthy or credible source of information based on 4 factors, which are listed here on the screen. Is that person a caring and empathetic individual? Again, going back to relating to people on a human level, this is not, that's the fundamental things apply, this is not really anything new. It's just more important now because of where we are as a society. You can see that caring and empathy is so important, in fact, that it's half the pie. So if you are not seen as a caring and empathetic source of information, you are not going to be an effective communicator, of course, to the world. You've got to demonstrate you're human first before you try to get any information across to anybody. The other 3 factors are equal slices of the pie. There's openness and honesty. Are you being truthful? Have you been deceitful in the past, either knowingly or unknowingly? Will affect whether people see you as a source of a trustworthy, credible source of information. Are you dedicated and committed to this issue? I think everybody here is dedicated and committed. Certainly you have members who are very dedicated and committed. That will probably come through, I would imagine, in most of the communication that you do. But you have to demonstrate that. And there are tools and tricks to doing that we'll talk about. And then, are you an expert? We are living in this age of the death of the expert, but that still factors into people's perception of whether you're a trustworthy and credible source of information. So you want to position yourself on that chart that I showed earlier from Edelman, not necessarily as a scientific expert, but perhaps as an association expert or a representative of your association or society, because that's going to be more credible these days than being actually a scientific expert. By the way, all of this applies not just to verbal communication, it applies to visual communication as well. So as we increasingly turn to social media and infographics and videos and other forms of visual communication, which are very effective and we strongly encourage as a firm, you do have to keep these criteria in mind when you put that information together. Is it conveying all of these criteria that people will use to judge whether that information you're sending them is trustworthy and credible?
How can you make corrections, like if you're perceived as not caring? How do you correct that?
Well, you can tell stories. Like
Oh, okay.
Dr. Rivera said,
Go back to those.
go back to those techniques. That's right, and try to engage people again on a human level.
Gotcha.
Active listening, so not just immediately thinking, oh, what am I going to say to this person who's talking to me? How am I going to respond to this? But really trying to understand where they're coming from, feed it back to them, so you show them you're trying to understand, and you get a good sense of where they're coming from. That's all going to help you be a more human, be more human, and therefore more effective. So getting back to the visual, one way to think about it from a visual standpoint, there's another story for you. Dr. Covello once did this kind of training for all newly minted 2-star generals for the United States Army. In one of his first classes, there was a guy named Schwarzkopf, who went on to be the commander of Allied forces in the first Gulf War, and he put all of the skills and techniques that we're going to talk about today to great use when he briefed reporters and was talking. He knew not to the reporters who were in the room, but to the American public back in the United States about what was going on. Time magazine contacted General Schwarzkopf's people. We're going to do a cover story on you, on the general. Can you send us some photos that we can use to illustrate the article and maybe something that we could put on the cover? And what did Schwarzkopf instruct his people to do? He sent a collage, half of which was him with his family back home in the United States. Caring, empathetic. A third of the photo was him meeting with his staff, dedicated, committed. A third was him briefing the press, a shot of him briefing the press, open, truthful, honest. And the third was him leading troops in the field, shot from behind him, going forward as he was inspecting Allied forces before the invasion of Iraq to liberate Kuwait. He took this these techniques and boiled them down into that one that one picture, collage of pictures, and that's what was on the cover of Time magazine when they did their cover story. So think visually, not just verbally, and these apply. There is a credibility gender gap that exists. The research shows, again, Dr. Rivera referred to some of this in her talk this morning. When it comes to these four factors, these four criteria that people use to judge whether we're trustworthy and credible sources of information, how many of you think men are more caring and empathetic than women? How many think women are more caring and empathetic? Everybody's hand goes up. When you look at the research, that's the case. Women are generally seen to be more caring and empathetic simply by virtue of their gender. Why? Because sort of psychologically and historically, women have been the caregivers. They're the ones who get the kids up, dressed, make their lunches, pick them up from school, do their homework. Dad just sits on the couch watching baseball and drinking beer. That's changing. That's not an accurate representation of the world today, but again, it's the perception that we have to deal with. When I first started doing this presentation 20 years ago, that check mark was further to the right. I have moved it to the left as society has begun to reflect the role that dads play in their children's upbringing. Certainly that doesn't describe me. I was a single dad for many years before I remarried. I was the guy doing all that stuff. So I felt I was a pretty caring person, but just without knowing me or anything about me, by virtue of being a man, I'm seen as less caring and empathetic. How about open and honest? How many people think women are more open and honest? How many people think men are more open and honest? Okay, it's a retrograde audience. Yes, women are seen as being more open and honest. By both men and women, not just women, so the population at large. Again, women like to talk about their feelings. That's what popular media conveys even to this day. Another place where media has an effect on people's perceptions. Women are seen as open. How about dedicated and committed? How many think more women are more dedicated and committed? How about men? Okay,
Talk about the perception,
perception.
not what we really believe.
Right, exactly. Or we know.
Before I raise
We know. This is the general public. So what I've seen, again, over the years since I've been doing this, is that check mark used to be way to the right. I have moved it even further to the left, you can see, than the other two elements, because the research is beginning to reflect that people see men are beginning to see men as dedicated and committed simply by virtue of their gender as women, which is a good thing for us as communicators, particularly for the men in the room, as well as I believe for society. How about expert and competent? How many people think people perceive women to be more expert and competent? How about that? Okay, pretty much the way it goes when I ask the question. Most people, men and women, perceive men to be more expert and competent simply by virtue of their gender. I had one person ask me when I did this presentation several years ago, I thought it was a particularly astute point. So, what if you're a female garage mechanic? What does that do to your credibility? And I said, well, have you ever seen the movie My Cousin Vinny? That sort of portrays, nobody believed that she could be an expert in car repair. Her father was a mechanic, her grandfather, her cousins, her uncles, her brothers. She grew up in a garage. She was every bit as competent as any man. But when she went up on that stand, people didn't think she was going to be competent. An expert because by virtue of being a woman and also the way she was dressed and other things that they get accused of people about. So this is what we're dealing with. As a result, if you have to communicate about a difficult issue effectively in this post-truth world, and you have a choice as to whom to send to do that communication, who would you choose? You choose a woman. Because she's going to walk into that situation with higher credibility and trust simply by virtue of her gender. It doesn't mean she can't lose credibility and trust. It doesn't mean she doesn't have to work to maintain it. But she's going to have a better shot at it just by virtue of being a woman. So one of the things that we encourage people to do, particularly when they're giving presentations or addressing a community meeting, or a potential hostile community meeting, which we do a lot of at my firm, if it's a woman, which we prefer, as it was in the situation I described earlier, we encourage her to talk about when she's introduced, or when she's introduces herself, talk about her credentials, talk about her academic degrees, the years of experience she's had. Why? Because she's already got these three sort of locked up by virtue of being a woman. She's got to focus on expertise and competence. When it comes to men, it's the other way around. When you describe yourself or introduce yourself, don't talk about the fact that you have a PhD or that you've been in business for 25 years. Talk about the fact that you are a father, that you are a volunteer in the community, all things that I have subtly been communicating to you over the course of this presentation to help boost my trust and credibility in your eyes. You also have to pay particular attention. I mentioned verbal and visual, where you can apply those criteria, some of the skills that we talked about. It turns out that in a high concern, low trust situation, nonverbal messages are 3 times more powerful than verbal messages. So people are going to remember what you look like, how you dress, what you do with your hands, your eyes. They're going to remember that much more vividly than what you say in a high concern, low trust situation. So you have to pay very close attention to those nonverbal messages. And mostly, that means not doing things that we do in our everyday lives, in our professional lives, and communicating with our colleagues and our family and our friends. We have to sort of wipe those aside and do it differently in this situation in order to be effective communicators. So what do we mean by that? There are many different factors, nonverbal cues that people will take and use to determine whether you're a trustworthy or credible source of information. I've listed 6 that are particularly important, and one that's actually sort of fun we'll get to at the end. The number one way people judge from a nonverbal standpoint is how you use your eyes. You have to maintain eye contact with the person or people that you're communicating with. In a group like this, it means going around, making brief eye contact with one of you, and then moving on, in order to be perceived as a trustworthy, credible source of information. The research shows that almost anything else you do with your eyes, other than maybe occasionally looking side to side for a moment, will have negative impacts on you as a source of trust and credibility. I mentioned that community meeting. We did one just a few weeks ago in Providence, Rhode Island. This was we knew going in, this was going to be hard. And I served as the moderator for this one. The client did a presentation, and we did Q&A. And I had to stand there for 2 hours while people accused me of not caring about them, of ruining their lives, putting my own children at risk, and many, many terrible things. When she was responding, sometimes it was just listening. We didn't have any choice. We just wanted to vent, so we stood there and took it. Some people asked legitimate questions. And when she was answering one question for a woman in the audience, she looked away from her very briefly as she was answering the question. And the woman immediately broke it. Don't look away from me when you're talking to me. Look at me. Just for the briefest moment, she looked at me. And the woman who was asking the question came down to her heart. So you just have to learn to maintain eye contact. One of the tricks of the trade, which you may have heard, is sort of the triangle from the tip of the nose to eyebrows. You can look anywhere in that space. If you're not comfortable sort of locking eyes with somebody, if you're looking in that triangle, that's enough to be making eye contact with people. Don't do this triangle because that is flirtatious. If you look at people's mouths, that's the signal that you're sending to people, is that you're interested in them in a romantic way. Hands, second most importantly, not verbal cue that you send. And it's easier really to talk about what not to do with your hands than what to do with them. But the bottom line is don't hide them. Make sure they're visible to the people you're talking to. This is true whether you're talking to one person or to a group of people. If you have to discipline an employee, don't sit behind your desk. Don't shove your hands in your pockets or hide them. Get out from behind the desk. Talk to them, nothing in between you and them. We'll talk about barriers in a minute. That's going to raise your level of trust and credibility with that person. So, going back to hands, you don't want to hide them. Make sure they're visible. Keep them between your hips and your shoulders, like I'm doing now. And as often as you can, do this gesture. Openness. Showing people that you're caring and empathetic, that you're dedicated, you want to hear from them. You're calling on psychological factors that go all the way back to the Middle Ages, when people started to shake hands to show they didn't have a weapon that they were going to hurt them with. This is Christ on the cross. His palms are open out to people. It's a very welcoming psychological gesture. So that's what you want to. That's what you want to do. Here's what you don't want to do. Any of these things, which we do in our daily lives all the time. We stop in the hall and talk to colleagues, shove our hands in our pockets, chat. That's not going to count against you in that situation, but it will in a high concern, low trust situation. And it's good practice, good technique to always show your hands in any situation, because again, that's just going to add to your trust and credibility as a source of information. Many things, the executioner's stance, particularly, please don't kick me. Wringing your hands can be a nervous thing that you might do, particularly in a difficult situation, that sends a signal that you're getting ready to attack. So you don't want to do that. This is right. This is not only hiding your hands; it's also a barrier between you. If you're trying to communicate with, putting your hands behind your back, hands on hips, all those things. You have to get those out of your repertoire for the purposes of high concern low trust situations, especially. Just make sure people can see your hands. Arrival and departure. This really comes into play primarily in these community meetings that we do, where it's a difficult audience that we're going to be talking to, like this situation I described just a few weeks ago. One of the things I do as a moderator is I introduce myself to every single person in the room before we started the presentation. Now they've met me. Now I'm human. I'm a person, not just a guy up there who's trying to ruin their lives by building this liquefaction plant in their community. And although it was rough, I would argue that it was easier because I did it. Because I looked them in the eyes, shook their hands, and said hello. And that made me human. So I got there ahead of time, and I engaged with people before the meeting started. I was an early arrival. And then when it came to departing, what do you think we wanted to do when people were done yelling at us? Hightail it to the nearest exit and get out of there. But we didn't. We stood, we stayed in the room, and waited to see if anybody was going to come up and engage us one-on-one, which nobody did. It was late, everybody wanted to go home. But as they looked over their shoulder when they were walking out the back of the room, they saw us up there, still willing to engage, still there for them to come and ask questions if they wanted to, which boosted what portion of our trust and credibility? Dedication and commitment. We weren't just there because we had to be. We weren't just doing this because the environmental regulator forced us to do it. We were there because we wanted to be there, because we had a good story that we wanted to share. It's not a story that most of those people wanted to hear, but we did our best in a difficult situation. Barriers I've already mentioned. Try to remove everything between you and the people you're talking to, so I'm not standing here behind this podium. I'm out here one-on-one. You're sitting behind the tables, but I'm not putting anything physical between you and me. That is a crutch. One of the reasons we also don't like to encourage clients not to do it is because some people grab on so white-knuckled that you can tell that they're afraid and uncomfortable, which is natural in a difficult situation, but sends the wrong signals in a high concern low trust situation. Because everything in a high concern low trust situation is perceived through the most negative filter possible. So while putting your hands in your pocket in a normal situation nobody's going to notice, putting your hands in your pocket in a high concern low trust situation, people are going to notice, and they're going to interpret that you are trying to hide something, that you're not dedicated and committed, you really want to be there, and so forth. So eliminate barriers. Clothing, very briefly, the general rule of thumb is dress one step above what your audience is going to be wearing. I think I did a pretty good job of that today. I debated whether or not to wear a sports coat, but when I got to the breakfast this morning and saw most of the men were not wearing sports coats, but just button-down shirts, I decided I'm going to wear my coat because that's a half step above what you all are wearing. So you don't want to be too overdressed. That sends the wrong signals. You don't want to be too casually dressed because that sends the wrong signals. Again, one step above. And I'll let women figure that out for yourselves, but I think you understand the principle. For men, like I said, you were all mostly button-down shirts and slacks, so I put a jacket on. If I noticed most of you were button-down shirts, slacks, and a jacket, I might have considered putting a tie on. I didn't, though, because ACCESSE informed me ahead of time it was business casual, so I didn't anticipate that anybody was going to be wearing a suit tie. If my audience was wearing sports coats and ties, which is so rare these days, I would wear a suit, again, one step above. For women and men, but it becomes more important for women, it includes not wearing any gaudy jewelry, earrings, necklaces that are going to detract from what you're saying to people, that people will focus on rather than the words that you're trying to tell them. Nothing too low cut, nothing skirts that are too short, anything that's going to distract the audience from what you're saying. You want to get it just very professionally dressed, again, one step above. And now's the fun. The mucous membrane syndrome. When there are two reasons why, two things that trigger what's known as the mucous membrane syndrome. One is when we are uncomfortable, which we very well may be going into a difficult, high concern, low trust situation, trying to communicate effectively in this post-truth world of ours. What it means is that our mucous membranes tend to dry up. We use this as an excuse to take a sip of water. When our mucous membranes dry up, we lick our lips more often. We scratch our faces. We blink more than we normally do, or sometimes less than we normally do. all of those things, again, today, I took a little drink. I don't think that hit me in any way in terms of my trustworthiness and credibility. But in a high concern, low trust situation, everything is built to the most negative filter possible. So if you start doing those things, people then think you're doing it because of the second trigger for the mucous membrane system, which is lying. When we are dishonest or deceitful, most of us, we're not psychopaths, our mucous membranes begin to dry up. Police detectives, FBI investigators are trained to look for these signals that can suggest that people are being dishonest and deceitful in the responses that they're giving. Let me go back to eye contact too. That I should have mentioned. One of the reasons why eye contact is so important, you have to maintain eye contact with people and not look away in any direction, is that the research shows that almost any way you look sends a negative message to people that you're communicating with in a high concern low trust situation. Research shows, let me get this right, when we are accessing a piece of information that exists in our brains, we look up and away from our dominant hand. So if you're right-handed and you're trying to think of something that you know, you're going to look up and go left. If you're being deceitful, and are creating a piece of information in your mind, you're going to look up and towards your dominant hand. We know this psychologically and subconsciously. We don't do it.
Say that again.
When we are accessing an existing piece of information in our minds, most of us will look up and away from our dominant hand. So if you're right-handed, you're going to look up like this. If you're left-handed, you're going to look up like that. When we are creating a piece of information in our minds, which means we are being dishonest, we look up and towards our dominant hand. I don't know how many of you have been paying attention. Do you know which hand I use? I'm a righty, like most people. Would you know that going into a difficult situation? As an audience member? No. So if I look up and in any direction, viewed through the most negative filter possible, it means I'm creating information. I'm being deceitful. And so mucous membrane is sort of a similar effect. But the assumption is you're being deceitful, not that you're nervous. And so there's only two ways I know to defeat the mucous membrane syndrome. One is to have a little bit of water before you give a presentation. Have a little bit there so you can take it once in a while, not too often. There's a famous video, I don't even remember Marco Rubio giving his response to the President's State of the Union. Up and coming young Republican, seen as a presidential candidate, eventually became a presidential candidate. I don't know, and you watched him give the address, but he suffered from mucous membrane syndrome about 30 seconds into giving his response, which was on a teleprompter in front of him. So he didn't have to memorize this information, but he was so nervous about the fact that he was having to speak to millions of Americans that it just hit him. And there was water, it was off to the side of the table, and he actually did this. He was talking, and he kept talking, he took a little sip, and then he put it back. And when we looked at that, we were like, well, it's credible, it just went right down the drain. So you have to make sure you're hydrated, and most importantly, be prepared. That's the best way. Because I know you're not going to lie to people, right? You're not going to be deceitful. So if mucous membrane syndrome is affecting you, it's because you're nervous and uncomfortable. The only way to get rid of that is to be well prepared for a high concern low trust situation. I talked about that meeting a few weeks ago. We trained, I think we put in a total of 25 hours of training with the presenter. Just having her stand there, do her thing, answer questions to get her ready. And she did a great job. She had that one hitch when the person yelled at her for looking away, but for the most part, she followed all of these rules. And there's other examples of mucous membrane. The other most famous one, an interesting one, also from the political sphere. The average person blinks at a rate of about 20,000 times a day. One of the highest blink rates ever recorded, somebody on television, was 6 times that rate, 120,000 times a day. Does anybody want to guess who that was? Richard Nixon. Richard Nixon is always, almost always, the first person people ask. You're close. He is a president. I did not have sexual relations. When we watched, we were gathered in our office watching President Clinton give that speech, and he was looking like a maniac. Go back and look at the video, and we all knew right away. Yeah, he's nervous and uncomfortable, but this guy's been on the world stage for years. That's not why he's doing that. He's doing it because he's not telling the truth. So he sent a very negative signal because of the way he reacted to mucous membrane syndrome. Here's an example of, we often will encourage people to get more credibility from the third-party source. The clergy can be an effective means to do that, although with all of the attention to the Catholic Church and the scandals that have gone on there, we have tended now to downplay that a bit. But you can see that this minister and many clergymen, they do this gesture because it is welcoming and open and caring and empathetic. So an example that you should follow. Traps to avoid, oh boy, I'm running out of time. There are worst case scenarios, hypotheticals, what ifs that people will try to ask you. Vaccinations, what happens if my child gets this disease as a result of the vaccination. Try to avoid getting caught in that trap. Instead of talking about hypotheticals, rather than speculating about what we don't know for sure, talk about what you don't. Stay focused on, here's what we know to be true, and here's the science that backs that up. Engaging on a human level. I'm not worried about any of you being dishonest. Obviously, that will destroy your trust and credibility and make it almost impossible if you are publicly caught being deceitful to regain trust and credibility. Think again of many of the politicians that we've seen over the last 40 years and how they're being dishonest. It's eroding their trust and credibility with the American people. We try to eliminate negatives from your vocabulary, the no, not, none, nothings, and nevers. We always encourage people, again, when they go back to those 3 points that they want their audience to take with them, make them positive. Vaccinations are safe. They're going to make your child healthier, and so forth. Rather than, vaccines are not dangerous. Your child won't get sick. Try to put a positive spin on it if you can.
Can I ask a question about that?
Yeah.
So, but oftentimes you're going to find situations where government, as they're talking about something, they won't use the word safe. They'll find there's no significant impact. They won't say safe. What's our role? What's our responsibility to then translate that and take it up a notch and say safe?
I think your job is to push as hard to be able to say that. This comes into play a lot when we work with attorneys who will not let us say certain things like, this is safe because it's 100% safe, what if this happens? But we often push back and say something, this is the safest we can make this. We're working as hard as we can to make it as safe as possible. I know that's taking some of the power away from simply saying this is safe, but there are situations where you can't say that for a variety of reasons. One of the sort of old nuggets from crisis communications is you get all the information out as fast as you can, as quickly as you can, build up that. Well, that's not realistic because in a crisis, almost by definition, you're not sure what's going on. You don't have all the facts available to you. So you have to structure your messages that you're trying to get across in a way that is truthful and accurate as you can be at that point, while acknowledging that we may learn more in the future that would change that. And when we do, we will share that information. That's the key. Also, if you get questions you don't know the answer to, be honest about it. That's a great question. I don't know the answer. But I'm going to find out. And if you leave your email with me, I'm going to get back to you. And make sure you follow up. That's dedication and commitment. Guarantees, try not to guarantee. You can't guarantee what you can't guarantee, right? There are no guarantees in life. People will ask you for them. Can you guarantee me that this plant is going to be safe? Let me tell you what I can do. I can guarantee you that we're doing everything we can to make sure that this is safe. And sort of rattle off your messages. And then jargon. We all have jargon, particularly in the scientific, engineering, technical world. It's the way we interact with our colleagues, our members. We throw it around without thinking about it. Have to remember that people outside of those professions probably don't know what you're talking about. Many of you probably can't communicate about your own organizations and the members that you represent because they're such different disciplines. We have two in our business, communication. You have to make sure you wipe all that jargon out of your vocabulary to the extent you can.
With jargon goes, sort of what level of language to use, right? If you're if you're using 5-year-old language, you're demeaning them. If you're using PhD type language, so where is the sort of the sweet spot if you're communicating to the general public or someone who's not an expert?
That's good. The first thing would be who's your audience. So if you're talking to the general public, what we suggest is you aim for people with an 8th grade education. And then you're going to sort of hit that sweet spot where you're not being condescending, but you're not being so dumbed down that they're going to find it. not credible. USA Today is written for an 8th grade education. The New York Times is written for a 12th grade education. You go online, there's all kinds of website software that will help you. You can plug in a paragraph of text or a whole story, and it will spit back to you what this level of education this is speaking to based on number of words in the sentence, syllables in the words, and other factors. And it's a good way to check if you're sending out a written communication. Is this going to be credible to people trying to speak to? And it doesn't just mean jargon like acronyms and things like that. It's phrases that you throw around as part of your professions. One quick last story. I don't have a video with me today, but back in 1989, there was a huge public health scare about the chemical known as ALR. Everybody remember that? It's a chemical that was sprayed on apples to keep them red and ripe on the store shelves. And the Natural Resources Defense Council came out with a study, a published study in a peer-reviewed journal, saying that ALR was a class 1, I think that's what it is, carcinogen. It was an incredibly potent carcinogen. It caused a public health, this was before the internet, remember, but it caused a public health scare nationwide. Parents took the applesauce out of their kids' lunches. Schools took apples out of their cafeterias. Grocery stores pulled apples and all Apple products off of their shelves. It was a huge deal at the time. And 60 Minutes did a segment about it one Sunday evening. They had the head of the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency. His name was Jack Moore. He was actually acting head at the time. He came on and he was interviewed by Ed Bradley about this issue. And Ed Bradley kept asking him over and over again, this part of a huge, long interview they did, this is what they condensed it to, why aren't you getting this chemical off the market? Why aren't you just telling people we can't use it anymore? And he kept trying to explain that he was bound by the rules and regulations and laws that were in place, and there was no means for him to simply declare that ALR was dangerous and therefore had to be taken off the market. He had started the process, the rulemaking process to do that, but as you know, that takes a very long time, or longer than most people would like, particularly when it comes to something that's potentially carcinogenic and affects their children. Back to those influence factors we talked about earlier. The very last part of this story is Ed Bradley asking him again. He says, Director Moore, one more time, why doesn't the EPA just regulate this chemical and get it off the market immediately? And the administrator shrugged his shoulders and said, it's the paradox of the statute. Cut. So, first of all, he was sitting back in his chair, he was rumpled. All the nonverbals he was sending were incorrect. And then when he was asked this very important, vital question from around the minds of millions of Americans, his response was, it's the paradox of the statute. Does anybody want to guess what most people think paradox of the statute means? Based on research that Vince Covello did, on Monday morning he sent graduate students out to the streets of Manhattan, which is what graduate students are good for, and asked them to interview people. When I say to you the paradox of the statute, what do you think that means? They did the number one response. Think absurd. A statue of two ducks.
What?
Paradox of the statute.
No, no.
The second most common response was statue of two doctors. No one could explain what the phrase paradox of the statute
That's a bigger
to the
problem.
graduate student. It's a bigger problem, but it's the world we live in on the perception side of the equation. So when the administrator of EPA was asked a very important question, most people heard him respond, it's a statue of two ducks. You think that was effective in trying to calm people down? By the way, the end of that story, the ding dong, if you will, is that the NRDC had to withdraw the study. It was found to be flawed. The journal that published it said, we have to retract this because it's not true. ALR was never a particularly dangerous carcinogen. It is still not used by the agriculture industry to keep apples on the market. That crisis pushed that chemical out of there quickly. They couldn't use it anymore, even though it was proven to be safe in the end. We have, I'm on past time here. I'm sorry we're not going to get to the group exercise, but let me quickly go through. This is a model answer that we have developed based on all of this research and techniques that we've been discussing today to think about answering difficult questions in these high concern, low trust situations, or any situation. Starts with caring and empathy, telling a story that people can relate to, then you answer the question, that's the positive message, soundbite that you want people to remember hours later after the interactions happen, and talk about next steps. That helps to increase your dedication and commitment score and gives people another way of finding information. Today, of course, the web's the perfect place to send people. If you'd like more information about this, go to this website. Go to our website, or go to this third-party website, even better. It has more. So we were going to, I realize I've run out of time, we were going to do this group exercise. I'll leave it with you as a thought experiment for you to think about later on today or when you get back to your homes and offices. I was going to ask each of you as a table to think about how you would answer this question from somebody, a member of the general public, maybe your neighbor. Why would we spend money, federal money, on your organization's key important research effort is? And how would you answer that non-concern trust situation? What story would you tell to get people to see you as a human being and therefore more willing to accept the information you're trying to give them? What would the message be you're trying to get across, and what would be the place you would send them for additional information? We're not going to do that because it's afternoon at such time. I went on too long. But very quickly, let me wrap up. As I said, Casablanca, the fundamental things still do apply in this crazy world, post-truth world that we live in. All the things we've talked about today, knowing your audience, engaging people on a human level rather than a scientific or data-driven level, thinking like Lincoln did in terms of being respectful of everybody's opinions, forgetting about the past and moving forward with people. But all the risk communication skills that we discussed are appropriate, as I said, in any situation, but absolutely vital in a high concern low trust situation. And finally, I know it isn't easy. I work with folks like you every day to try to communicate about these issues, to convince people to believe one thing or another, persuade them to take some sort of action that will be to their benefit. You run into all kinds of barriers to that. You run into sometimes anger and distrust and suspicion, but you can never consider what you all do is just too important, and you've got to keep up the fight. And I've enjoyed working with some of you and some of your colleagues to do that, and I look forward to doing that for another 25 years, I guess. So thank you. Here's my source of additional information. If you want to get in touch with me, my email and my phone number, feel free to reach out if you have a question or a concern that you'd like some help with. And I know we're passing the group to any questions, I'd be happy to take them, and I will stay here. If you'd like to come up and call and ask